After its first tournament in November of 1993, the UFC almost immediately gained wide popularity due to its novelty and entertainment. But the brutality of the competition and how the organizers promoted it by advertising the tournaments as fights without rules quickly attracted the attention of critics. U.S. Senator John McCain and local authorities did their best to shut the UFC down. After a disastrous UFC 9, where the organizers departed from the tournament-style format and lost the interest of the audience, who became bored watching the card fights, the organizers needed a change. Therefore, by popular demand, the organizers decided to return to the usual tournament format. And with this relaunch, they also featured a new promotion star and future MMA legend. On July 12, 1996, the UFC 10 tournament took place, where they followed the traditional Olympic system with 8 fighters competing for victory. At the time, fans were mostly into the tournament style, as it was thought to add an element of suspense to the fights. The events were broadcast live on pay-per-view in the United States and later released on VHS. The legendary Bruce Buffer, who still is an indispensable UFC ring announcer, announced the fights in the octagon for the first time. But there's another fact that became important for the history of the development of mixed martial arts. This was the debut of the talented American wrestler Mark Coleman, who is considered the founder and pioneer of the ground and pound strategy. This style of ground control has been, is, and will be used by all successful mixed martial arts fighters. Mark Coleman started wrestling as a teenager. He said that from an early age he knew that he wanted to become the best athlete in the world. At the age of 19, Mark was already a double-state wrestling champion. As a university student, he became a 2-time Mid-America Wrestling Conference champion and won the NCAA championship. After graduating from university, Coleman set his sights on representing the United States on the world stage. He worked as an assistant coach helping a close friend, Kevin Randleman, win the NCAA title. During his coaching years, Coleman used university gyms to stay in shape for competition, a move that paid off with a gold medal at the 1991 Pan American Games. Not only did the conditions help Mark prepare for international competition, but he sparred daily with heavyweights such as Randleman, Ray Mendoza, and Nick Nutter. At the World Championships in Bulgaria in 1991, he finished second and was awarded a place on the U.S. wrestling team. He took part in the Olympic Games twice. In 1992 in Barcelona, he finished 7th overall, and in 1996 in Atlanta, he lost in the semi-finals. Mark was lucky that a new sport, mixed martial arts, began to take shape around the time his wrestling career came to an end. Wanting to become the best in the world, Mark turned his attention to the mixed martial arts cage. In the first fight of the quarterfinals of the UFC 10 tournament, undefeated fighter Don Frye fought kickboxer Mark Hall. Don Frye was the UFC 8 tournament champion and defeated Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu master Amory Bittetti at UFC 9. Therefore, he was the fan favorite for the upcoming tournament. In his amateur wrestling career, Frye's trainer was Dan Severn, who later became the UFC 5 champion. In the quarterfinals of the UFC 8 tournament, Frye won the record for the fastest knockout at the time, sending 410-pound Thomas Ramirez to sleep in just 8 seconds. Don Frye's UFC 10 opponent, Mark Hall, went 3-1 and was famous for his 42-second stoppage of 390-pound world sumo champion Koji Kitao at the last UFC. When the fight started, Hall landed a good spinning hook to the ribs on Frye, but immediately Don had a beautiful slam and took control on the ground. Frye started hitting the ribs, and after about a minute, bruises were visible on Hall. The entire battle took place on the ground. Hall occasionally tried to strike from below, and Frye concentrated his attack on the opponent's body with heavy, audible blows to the ribs.
octagon fence. Once again, he'll be in a fight.
Around the 8th minute, Frye got up and landed several shots to Hall's head. At the 11th minute, the referee Big John McCarthy stopped the fight due to Mark Hall's lack of defense. He was indeed exhausted when he got to his feet. This was a magnificent display of Frye's sportsmanship and Hall's resilience. With this win, Don Frye made it to the semifinals of the tournament. Mark Hall went into the octagon twice more against Don in the future, but lost both times and ended his career with a negative record of 5-6. In the second fight of the quarterfinals, debutants Brian Johnston and Scott Fiedler entered the octagon against each other. Both guys were listed as kickboxers with some wrestling skills, and both were pretty big with the same height of 6'4" and weighing over 220 pounds. The fight quickly and unexpectedly turned into a wrestling match. Immediately after the bell, Johnston threw a hip shot and missed with a hard soccer kick. He then immediately attempted another throw and unsuccessfully attempted to escape from a heel twist. Scott Fiedler tried to choke Brian from a back mount, but Johnston escaped and the fighters switched places. Now, he sat on the opponent's back and struck from behind. In the 3rd minute, the referee stopped this beating in favor of Brian Johnston. He advanced to the semifinals against Don Frye, and Scott Fiedler no longer fought in the pros. Mark Coleman and former Israeli karate champion Moti Horenstein entered the 3rd fight of the quarterfinals as new contestants. The organizers advertised both fighters as newcomers, but Coleman was the most decorated world-class fighter to ever compete in the UFC octagon. The commentator noted that Horenstein is similar to Jean-Claude Van Damme, but more rigid. The Israeli fighter started with a front kick, while Coleman went to the legs and took the fight to the ground. Mark immediately got into full mount position and turned on his hard ground and pound. Horenstein defended himself as best as he could and tried to block Mark's blows. From side control, Coleman hit a knee to the head, and then he delivered several heavy blows to the head. Horenstein covered his face with his hands, and Big John McCarthy stopped the fight. Coleman scores an impressive win on his debut match and advances to the semifinals. Moti Horenstein had a total of 7 fights and won only once. In the last fight of the quarterfinals, the already experienced Trinidad kickboxer Gary Goodridge, nicknamed Big Daddy, who had a 2-2 record, fought against newcomer John Campatella. After the gong, Campatella pushed forward and ran into a series of tight hooks from Goodridge. John made a throw himself, but the fighters quickly got up. The athletes grappled in a clinch, where Campatella dominated and delivered a powerful blow to the back of the head. Goodridge unexpectedly pulled his opponent down, where he managed to roll and saddle Campatella and deliver 4 heavy left-handed strikes to the head. Big John McCarthy stopped the fight. Big Daddy moved up to the semifinals, where he would fight Mark Coleman. For Campatella, it was the first and last fight in his professional career. Don Frye and Brian Johnston faced each other in the first bout of the semifinals. Both fighters had survived the quarterfinals with minimal damage and came into the fight in good spirits. Only Frye's right eye was a bit swollen. The confident gait of Don Frye, with which he walked towards his opponent after the bell, impressed everyone. He immediately made a pass, but Johnston countered him well with a knee and punches. In the long clinch, both fighters landed several blows. There was a good series of punches to the ribs from Frye, and then the initiative passed to Johnston, and he threw a good series of punches. Frye had a takedown and some control on the ground from behind, delivering lots of body shots.
Post a leg and get up. Right there you are.
He's using the left hand.
Get up on his toes and start shaking. Frye's going to fall out front. You agree with me on that?
Johnston rolls over, and Frye takes a side control position. He delivers a powerful elbow strike that leaves a cut over Johnston's right eye. Bryan taps out at the 5th minute of the fight. Don Frye made it to the final, while Bryan Johnston would go on to have 8 more fights and end his career a year later with a 5-5 record. The other 2 quarterfinal winners, Mark Coleman and Gary Big Daddy Goodridge, met in the second bout of the semifinals. After the gong, Goodridge took the center of the octagon and began to press. Coleman performed a takedown and got into the guard position, trying to control his opponent. Goodridge tied his hands and prevented Coleman from successfully performing his ground and pound. Mark headbutted Gary's face to free his hands for punches. Gary managed to get up, but Coleman controlled him from behind and landed some solid uppercuts and hooks to the head.
The lower tail bar.
Tooted on the fly. Uppercut again by Coleman. Another one to the back.
Shows heavily onto his back.
Goodridge broke free and started chasing Coleman with hooks, but missed. Mark made a takedown and landed several significant punches from side control. Big Daddy gave Coleman his back and immediately gave up as Coleman tucked his legs in for a chokehold. Mark Coleman moved up to the finals, and Gary Goodridge went on to have a long professional career, not only in MMA, but also in kickboxing, where he had victories over UFC champions Don Frye and Oleg Taktarov. It was time for the finals. Don Frye and Mark Coleman entered the ring. Both men had proved themselves as talented fighters, but Coleman was 31 pounds heavier than Frye. However, a lighter fighter is likely to have more staying power in the standing position. After the bell, Coleman immediately tried a takedown. Frye skillfully defended himself from the pass, but almost immediately gave Coleman his back. Don took several heavy overhand blows from Coleman to his head. Frye tried to defend himself, but Mark was able to use his ground and pound technique. There were a lot of opportunities for submissions, but Frye's downside was that he didn't see or take advantage of them. Instead, Don missed more and more incoming strikes. Frye eventually got to his feet thanks to Coleman's careless grab on his head. Both fighters already looked exhausted. Coleman took a hit, but brought Frye back to the canvas of the octagon. He turns his ground and pound back on, but Big John McCarthy stops the fight to look at Don Frye's condition. The audience buzzes with displeasure, and Mark also resents this interruption by the referee. After the break, the fighters fought in the standing position for some time, but Coleman was able to take Frye's back, break the defense, and tried to go for a chokehold.
He's more adept of it, more. A much stronger base when he spreads his fight in the medium. He's best at tradition. So when they're behind here, you Nelson, this is pure wrestling technique.
Frye reversed, but could not hold the position. Coleman was able to lift Frye and land a powerful right hook to his head as he lowered him back down. Coleman immediately followed with another series of blows to Frye's head. Mark performed a takedown and turned on his ground and pound once more. After several headbutts from Coleman to Frye's face, the referee stopped the fight at 12 minutes. Mark Coleman completed his impressive debut by inflicting Frye's first loss and becoming the UFC 10 tournament champion. Don Frye would go on a 9-fight winning streak to win the UFC Ultimate 96. Coming on the heels of UFC 9, which didn't have any really good fights and was dragged down by a couple of bad ones, this tournament was a breath of fresh air. There was a lot of action in almost every battle. It was one of the best tournaments as there were no substitutes called in and there were no bad fights at all. Historically, it was in this tournament that the ground and pound style was born. Coleman has been dubbed the godfather of ground and pound for his takedown technique, followed by his furious punches, elbows, and headbutts. This type of combat strategy earned him the nickname Hammer. Coleman knocked down everyone in front of him and continued to drive them into submission. It was the most impressive UFC debut to date, including Don Frye's debut in UFC 8. Coleman showed what a truly aggressive fighter can do. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like and leave us a comment, and hit the bell to turn on notifications so you won't miss our next videos. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so right now. See you next time in the ring.